What did you learn in elementary school that turned out to be false/a lie when you reached adulthood? Cracking your knuckles just stretches the space between your joints, and that space has fluid in it to cushion your joints. The cracking sound is just air bubbles in that fluid popping. No harm done, no arthritis or larger knuckles. Edit. Apparently, lots of people think I said you can never cause any harm in any circumstance, but if you're pushing your joints too far to force them to pop, of course you're going to damage any ligaments on your fingers from overextension. Please don't force your knuckles to pop if they don't need to. The popping itself is harmless, but forcing it is not. Also, juvenile arthritis is caused by the immune system attacking your joints. If someone says they know a guy who got arthritis at 12 from cracking their joints, they're mixing up the lie they've been told with what actually causes it. I know this because I have the same autoimmune disorder. I've had arthritis since I was 11. Story 2. Was hanging out with a girl a long time ago and cracked my knuckles in front of her mom, who is a RN. Her mom proceeds to go off about how bad it is for me and it'll cause arthritis, and I just said, "That's actually an old wives' tale." She flipped and said, "I'm a registered nurse. What are your credentials?" I proceeded to show her an article about Donald Unger, a guy who won an LG Nobel Prize for cracking his knuckles for 60 years to disprove the whole cracking your knuckles causes arthritis thing. She was pissed. Edit. I've been corrected. He won an LG Nobel Prize of Medicine. The LGs are satirical and meant to celebrate trivial or unusual scientific achievements that first make people laugh, then make people think. Thanks for all the corrections/new knowledge. Story 3. That I should never stand up to a bully. I should stop reacting so they would get bored and leave me alone. That if I ever fought back, I would be suspended so it wouldn't be worth it. Don't worry, every time I went to the teachers for help, I was told I needed to share my lunch so it wouldn't get stolen. I needed to be more forgiving and understanding because the girl who attacked me was on the cheer team, etc. So this didn't give me some lasting problems with conflict. Nope. Story 4. Recycling plastic is an effective way to help save the environment. Turns out the whole campaign was started by the oil industry as a way to make people feel better about buying plastic, knowing all along that there is never any infrastructure in place to feasibly separate and clean plastics, so they end up tossed in the landfill with everything else. I'm hoping this will change as smaller companies start adopting better practices, but the vast majority of these are doing the same greenwashing in the name of creating a positive environmental culture, while actually not doing anything to help. As someone that really jumped into environmentalism and conservation, it was heartbreaking to learn about this. I'm hopeful that we can make better advancements on biodegradable plastics, since ocean plastic is projected to triple by 2040 at our current rate. Story 5. The Indians taught the Pilgrims to grow corn. Even my husband was taught this. He's Native Alaskan/Native American and grew up in Alaska. People still don't like the idea of teaching kids that Europeans kind of just came to the Americas and really effed over the locals. Again and again. Moved them because they wanted resources, then moved them again because they were on different resources, and acting like they're doing them all a huge favor by genociding their people. Check out an indigenous people's history of the United States. Holy hell, it's insane how much crap indigenous people have gone through. The Simpsons weren't joking when they had a Thanksgiving Day papier-mâché parade float made of broken treaties. Well, everybody knows that the Simpsons accurately predict everything that's going to happen and everything that ever did happen that was covered up historically, right? Those writers are absolute geniuses and apparently prophets. Story 6. If you play Michael Jackson, Wham, and Queen music backwards, you can hear satanic messages. Effing hilarious. Our music teacher literally played some stupid article for us that discussed this phenomenon. They played a Michael Jackson song backwards and literally clutched at straws to vaguely make out the words, "It's fun to smoke marijuana." These people were responsible for our education. F me. This was around the same time Ninja Turtles were branded as satanic by the same generation of conservative racist boomers. I'm surprised that this poster mentioned playing music from the 70s and 80s backwards and didn't mention the infamous Led Zeppelin Stairway to Heaven backwards, which literally has them saying things about like worshiping Satan. It was a weird time. Story 7. We live in an area with a lot of Hispanic people, so I decided to take all the Spanish classes I could back in elementary and junior high. For some reason, I stopped though. Should have taken that crap in high school and college. Back then, we used to crap talk a lot and brag and beat our chests and say dumb crap. You know how it is. One year, it got cool to say the insults in Spanish on the playground. So immediately, we were like, profe, ¿cómo se dice white trash or your mama or whatever? This teacher would just give us the literal translation of everything, all casual. She'd just be like, oh, white trash, esta blanco basura. F your mother, esta chinga tu madre. The one I remember the most was stud. I was like, ¿cómo se dice stud? She said to him, you mean a breeding horse? Sí. She said, caballo cimental. I told everyone, yo soy caballo cimental. I said that crap all the time. I was just running around going, yo soy caballo cimental. I forgot about the phrase entirely until last year. After I got my COVID vaccine, I started traveling to Mexico a lot because tickets were ridiculously cheap post-pandemic. We were at the hostel all high as F, and I beat everyone in chess, and I proclaimed loudly, yo soy caballo cimental. All the Latinos were like, what the F did he just say? They were all saying, semen? No semen. Then they all busted out laughing. Caballo cimental. Sí, ya. It turns out it literally means a horse full of semen in Spanish. They thought it was so funny. It's such a dumb thing to say, but it cracked them up, and Manny kept saying, tequila para el caballo cimental. Everyone drank so much tequila that night. And then me and Manny made love because he had a private room at the hostel. I usually don't make love to guys, but it got me out of the dorms for the night. 12 travelers in one room, and those guys snored like mother effers when they drank tequila. Plus, Manny had AC, and also a beautiful chicken. Story 8. That when history is taught in American schools, it's very watered down or omitted altogether. The destruction of Black Wall Street in Tulsa in 1921, not so much as a blurb. Mass deportation of Poles by Stalin during World War II? Nope. Homosexuals being left in the concentration camps because they were homosexual, rather than being freed with everyone else when the Americans liberated them? I didn't find any of this until I got to college. Story 9. The primary colors are red, yellow, and blue. Deoxygenated blood is blue. Electrons orbit atoms like a planet around the sun. Different parts of the tongue are responsible for different tastes, and on that note, there are 5 flavors. There are thousands of different chemicals we can taste. To suggest all flavors are made of different amounts of savory, salty, sweet, sour, bitter, and umami is stupid and wrong. If that were the case, iron would have no flavor, for example. Of course, I knew all these things before adulthood, but there are definitely a lot of people who do not. Story 10. At my school in Canada in junior high, I understood that the United States won the space race against Russia, with the all-climatic moment being the landing of man on the moon. It was only later I learned Russia put the first. Satellite in space, animal in space, man in space, woman in space, first multi-person spacecraft, first spacewalk, first spacecraft to land on the moon, first spacecraft to fly around the moon and land on Earth. The man on the moon seems like the least important and most frivolous compared to the others. That said, the one great thing about the man on the moon was how great it was for popular imagination. Story 11. Pretty much everything they taught in DARE program. Scare tactics and bullcrap propaganda in an attempt to get us, the uber-impressionable youth, to rat on our own parents. The day they showed one school in my same district what pot plants looked like and asked if anyone had seen these before. One student raised his hand and said his daddy had a bunch in their basement. In no time, a search warrant was issued. SWAT team kicks this student's front door in, no doubt armed to the teeth, found the indoor grow-op the student mentioned, and dragged daddy out in handcuffs, off to jail. This was circa 1988 in Southwest Virginia. I would imagine he got around a 10-year sentence, all because that DARE cop tricked a child into incriminating his dad enough to start a criminal investigation. If anything, for me, DARE made some drugs sound cool. What a effing turd of a program. So me and my buddies, we had to go through DARE in elementary school, so that was like grade 3 through 5. And the motto was DARE, to keep kids off drugs. And we would just always say, yeah, DARE, to keep kids on drugs. And we always would take more interest into potentially trying those things later down the road instead of scaring us away. So yeah, DARE didn't really work as intended. That's probably why it's not around anymore. Story 12. That all people should get to vote for the proper functioning of a democracy. Most people are rationally ignorant. They choose not to learn. Then we all expect them to help us decide the direction of a country. Based on what? Feelings? Makes no sense. I don't care about your thoughts on what a plumber should do, unless you're a plumber. Samesies for dentists, doctors, civil engineering, etc. The entire thing is based on ads. Companies have all the money that pays for ads, so we just vote on whoever is controlled by money better. It's how we get crazies and grifters into politics. Story 13. All the people saying they were taught Columbus was a hero after suffering from the Mandela effect. I went to school in rural Kentucky and was clearly told how it went down, in an age-appropriate way. Hell, I remember the teacher even explained the nuance about Amerigo Vespucci, and my books didn't paint him as a hero. The books were 30-plus years old. Until this thread, I've never heard someone actually say he was a good guy, and I bet if you look at the history books, they didn't say it either. More likely, these people were kids and assumed he was good because he discovered America, and stuck with that notion until they discover he was just like any other explorer of his day. Story 14. The United States government has 3 separate branches with a system of checks and balances to keep the government from being too bloated and acting against the general interest of the people. The truth is that there are 4 branches. School leaves out the most powerful branch, that being lobbyists. They also fail to tell you that Republicans and Democrats are bought by said lobbyists and paid to exclusively act against the general interest of the people. Story 15. Well, not so much a lie I learned better about, like the ever-evolving food pyramid, but an assumption from childhood that came back to smack me in adulthood. I was doing scientific illustration and we had to pick a cycle to illustrate. The example we were given was the digestion and regurgitation cycle of an owl processing food. So I picked my topic and procrastinate because I have more imminent deadlines. I picked what happens inside the chrysalis and cocoon, knowing that we were taught about it as kids and I really didn't know, so it would be a fun learn. By the time I actually started researching, I realized I messed up, but I was way too deep to change now. I ended up having to contact foreign universities doing studies actively to get an update so I could throw some semblance of an illustration together. They had translators on hand, or were all able to speak English, not sure, and were quick to respond and happy to share all their findings thus far. I think they were thrilled anyone outside their circle was interested. The TLDR of what happens in there. Their body melts into soup. It leaves behind imaginal cells that migrate very intentionally to certain points in the goo and later form key points like a leg or a wing. When they emerge, the hardening process is still occurring when they emerge as they take several minutes to let their wings dry and set so they can use them. Fun fact. Several varieties of moth, when they emerge from their cocoon, have reformed with no workable mouth and slowly starve to death over the course of the next few weeks. Think of that the next time you see a crazy moth and think that they're stupid. They're grasping for death with fervor. In retrospect, this fact was not very fun, but that's Reddit. Story 16. Not false or a lie, but very odd. Making kids say the Pledge of Allegiance to America, it sounds like a medieval practice and is unnecessary. The kids don't understand what they're saying and shouldn't pledge allegiance to something they don't understand. The fact they allow the one nation under God part is also odd, as many kids don't even understand religion or made a choice yet. It's as if that whole thing was a micro-indoctrination. Why say one nation under God when the nation is about religious freedom and choice? Story 17. We did this horrible exercise at the Catholic high school I went to. You glued a paper heart to another heart, let them dry, then tried to separate them. Of course, pieces of the heart were torn and left on the other. Their point was that when you sleep with someone, you never get your full self back. You lose a piece of yourself to stay abstinent and don't have many sexual partners. And if you do have lots of partners, you'll never be your whole self again. This was after the abortion talk they gave us, where they brought a woman in who regretted her abortion. She cried and grieved in front of us and told us we'd never forgive ourselves if we got one. She told us about the letters she writes her unborn child. Then they gave us a tiny plastic baby to show us what we'd be murdering. Haunted me for many years until I learned better. Story 18. That whole tongue diagram thing about sour or bitter taste buds being more important in certain areas. Bonus story. In 3rd grade, the teacher gave each of us 4 swabs for a taste test. She would come around and apply an unknown taste to the swab and tell us to swab it on a certain part of our tongue. As we went through the first 3, the class collectively gagged, okay, the bitter taste, or it reacted disgusted on the sour and salty taste. Before she came along with the 4th taste, I dipped my swab in a cup of water, hoping it would dilute whatever bad taste I thought she was about to give me this time. But she first felt the tip of the swab first with her fingers, and she berated me, saying I wouldn't get the last taste because I didn't follow directions. The taste I ended up missing out on turned out to be the sweet taste, but I just thought to myself, well, excuse me for being precautious after you betrayed my trust the first 3 times. Story 19. primary school as we call it, said that Jesus was alive after the dinosaurs. No, I mean right after. They believe that Jesus, the Son of God, was born right after the dinosaurs. Moses, Noah, David, Elijah were all alive during the period of the dinosaurs. Basically, their assumption was that Noah forgot how to bring the dinos into the ark, and so they were cast out into the floods, thus leaving the bones into the sand we see today. Strange, it personally took me much harder to grasp the concept of fossils during my secondary school years, but I managed and did pretty well. But what a wild imagination to have for that to be the doctrine of your life. Story 20. The whole story of Rasputin's death. The story, as I was told it, and I will repeat it here just because it's a good lark, is that the anti-monarchists tried to murder Rasputin with poison tea, and he just kept drinking it with no ill effects. They got jittery that he wasn't dying, so someone pulled a knife, and they stabbed him in the struggle. They left him in the basement, but when they went to get him and dispose of the body, he'd gotten back up. So they shot him in a panic, putting him back down. At this point, terrified, they wrapped him in a rug and threw him into a frozen river to dispose of him. But days later, the body was found, having escaped the rug and attempted to get out of the water, only to die of drowning as he couldn't break through the ice, according to autopsy. Great story. Hilarious story. Almost believable, just because weird crap happens and some hardy mother effers survive more than they should. Also a lie. Rasputin got shot and didn't get back up, according to records, and rumors of his death were greatly exaggerated as anti-Tsarist propaganda to portray Rasputin, one of the Tsar's advisors, as a witch or some other unnatural satanic monster. Story 21. Pretty much everything. One that sticks out is the smallpox blankets and the Native Americans. The smallpox blankets were given out in the mid-1700s. Germ theory wasn't a thing until about 100 years later in the 1850s. Viruses were discovered in 1890. Another is all the black inventions they taught us about. Literally every one they took the time to teach us about was a lie. Peanut butter, the light bulb, which they also lied about when they told us it was invented by Edison. They missed the guy who invented refrigerated transport, which is arguably one of the most critical inventions of our food supply chain. They missed the nurse who essentially invented the video doorbell. Story 22. The stupid 3-point system to stop bullying. When I was a child, everyone was given the same copy and paste 3-step method to stop someone from bothering you. 1. Tell them, stop, I don't like that. 2. Walk away. 3. Tell an adult. The problem is that these rules didn't do anything except encourage the a-hole kid because you didn't really do anything to stop them, and the teacher didn't either because there was only so much they were legally able to do. Put them in the corner for 30 minutes? That just angered the jerk kid and gave them ammo to come at you with. When the 3 methods didn't work at all, I did what my stepfather suggested and began my second week of first grade by clocking the jerk kid in the head with a stapler and blackening his eye. When the dust settled, the principal sat me down and scolded me for not following the 3 commandments of no bullying, and for probably the first time in my life, I lost my temper and screamed at her that the rules didn't do crap. And yes, I was using that language when I was 7. She was taken aback, certainly, and I believe my teacher lied about me informing her of this problem kid to save her own skin. My parents were the real heroes and didn't punish me. I remember my dad even being proud. I got my first detention from the entire fiasco, but he never bothered me again. Sorry for the length. I guess I needed to write this down. F you, Mrs. Stoudemire. Story 23. Oh god, lots of things. Pluto is a planet. Pluto, we've done you wrong. Columbus set sail to prove the Earth wasn't flat. Turns out most people at the time already accepted this. We only use 10% of our brains. This one was debunked over and over. The Great Wall of China is the only man-made object visible from space. Flat false, apparently. The first Thanksgiving was a peaceful event where settlers and Native Americans came together to celebrate. Ooh boy, this was wrong. Apparently, it was a celebration thrown after the slaughter of over 700 Pequots. Touching frogs and toads will give you warts. Sorry to say, warts are only caused by a human virus, and from personal experience, very painful when gotten on the palms of your feet. The taste bud map. Turns out it's pretty much everywhere on your tongue and it all works together. And many more. Story 24. That mushrooms were not made up of cells. I don't remember how I learned this, but I know for a fact I learned it as a child. No, I cannot explain. I have no idea how I went at least 15 years thinking this. I never thought about how else they could be made. I just assumed it was something beyond me. And maybe they were, like, raw materials? Like protein foam? I have no idea. When I learned they were cellular organisms at 25-ish years old, I laughed. Of course they're made of cells. Literally, how else would they exist? I consider myself smart. No idea how this happened. Haha. Story 25. Cursive is how all business folks do business. Ha! Can kids even read cursive these days? Can't use a calculator? You'll never have one when you need it. Send using Reddit mobile. Video games will never lead to anything. Multiple relationships and most of my friend groups are over video games. It's something we have in common. Just be happy. There's no reason to be sad or snuffy. Smile. F off. That level of toxic emotional corruption causes an insane amount of anxiety and stress. It makes people need things to be good, and things fall apart when they aren't. Worse yet, it has the same sort of self-proliferation problem as extreme masculinity, where it starts mild and breeds deeper and deeper levels. There's a high demand for skilled labor, and not everything can be outsourced. Depends on if you consider AI replacements as outsourcing. There are some lovely cars, artwork makers, and learning algorithms out there. 20 gigabytes is a massive hard drive. You can't even fill it up. Haha. How big was the last Call of Duty? 219 gigabytes-ish? Disney is a lovely place to go for vacation. Damn people, trap run by a mouse. Story 26. While I don't believe it was intentional, the lie about dinosaurs is giant lizards modeled after current lizards on Earth. Most books were pretty similar in how they referenced the giant creatures of old. Feathers on a dinosaur? Inconceivable! Just in the few decades I've been alive, we've learned so much more about them as we make new discoveries every day and challenge what we were originally taught. Now I'm curious to see if a reboot of Jurassic Park would put feathers on velociraptors, as well as make them actual size. Given the size in the movie is an outright lie. Story 27. That summer is hotter because we're closer to the sun when the planet tilts. These things are taught to elementary children because, developmentally, children are not yet able to understand the truth. Light density distributed across the surface of a sphere. They can't yet conceptualize it and therefore can't understand it. The idea, didactically seen, is to set up a cognitive framework that makes understanding the actual concept easier in later years when the cognitive development has advanced. Sadly, these lies to children, Terry Pratchett, often aren't corrected due to poor systemic and syllabic oversight in educational institutions. The way our school systems are designed makes it quite tricky to track who learned what and when those things need to be corrected. The season thing did not get corrected for me until high school physics, which was an elective subject. So anyone who did not take physics probably still thinks that the distance to the sun is why it's hotter in summer. For anyone who does not know, it's because in the summer we face the light more directly, which distributes the same amount of light energy across a smaller surface. Essentially, the light is more dense, thus it's hotter. The distance is a matter of a few hundred miles, which is irrelevant for solar distance scale. Story 28. That Eli Whitney was a black man. The history of this is interesting because researchers into this Mandela effect have not been able to find textbooks that had any pictures of a black man who was supposed to be Whitney. But a lot of schools tangled up Whitney's invention with slavery and either assumed, because of his name or because his job made slave work a bit easier, that he was somehow a hero of the slave community, which in turn made people think he was black. Many people did pick up that information and start to teach it as if he was black. The real story is that Whitney's creation likely prolonged slavery, as slaves could be forced to use the gin to harvest cotton more effectively. Story 29. That in the real world, people wouldn't find any of my pranks funny. Au contraire. 10 years ago, the GM and HR tried to have a serious talk with me about some pranks I was pulling on a coworker who seriously dished it out but couldn't take it. At one point, while they were reading off a list of things I had done, the GM started laughing so hard he had to leave the room. HR was just silent. When the GM came back, he said, "Look, just tone it down some, okay?" They had to get the CTO involved to change permissions and set additional credential levels because I had automated my pranks. Story 30. You must go to college and get a STEM degree, otherwise you will never get a job. Companies will be falling over themselves to offer you a well-paying job the moment you graduate with a STEM degree. Here I sit, with a degree in chemistry and a degree in physics, working as a sailmaker. Effing generational lies. My friends who are welders make literally 10 times what I do. Literally, I live below the poverty line for a highly skilled, specialized field. I hate everything about the USA. So just to elaborate and add on to this, it's definitely different for those of us that grew up like in the 80s and 90s versus today, where with the advent of the internet and social media, it's so easy now just to teach yourself how to do things and learn trades that otherwise you would have had to go to a paid college and get formal education on how to do. And also, now more than ever, it's about who you know more than what you know. I know people that have high school diplomas that are making double what people with master's degrees have. So yeah, that's definitely a bit of a conundrum, and a lot of people waste their money on college. Story 31. Swallowing gum. I was told it would stay in my stomach for 20 years and that I should always spit it out. Mind you, this was from a science teacher and she was extremely serious. We were talking about hygiene and diet and she brought up gum. This was at a private Catholic school too, which had the permission to hire anyone they felt could be a teacher, with or without a degree. A handful of those teachers were very, very bad, like hiding cameras in bookshelves to record you without your consent kind of bad. Needless to say, my mom took me and my brother out of that school early. Story 32. There's a lot of complaining here. You learn to do math as it trains the brain. You memorize poems as it trains the brain. You understand chemical reactions as it trains your brain. You write cursive as it improves your coordination and improves your brain. Olympic swimmers don't say, hey, I won't be running in the pool. They just go and do the run as it's part of the training. Not everything we do in school is because you will do it as is in real life. That being said, education can be prone to not adapting to life fast enough. But then again, life is changing so fast nowadays. The reason they don't teach you how to do your taxes is because the tax code changes 600 times per year. They teach you how to read and do math, which is what you need to do taxes. Story 33. That the Treaty of Versailles was this humiliating, extreme treaty that pushed the German people towards the Nazis. This is a view that's mostly rejected by historians. Worse, my history book used this quote. This isn't a peace treaty. This is an armistice for 20 years. Ferdinand Foch. Problem with this quote? The textbook made it out as if Foch was shocked by the harshness of the treaty. However, in reality, he was criticizing the treaty for being too soft and allowing Germany to recover. And he was right. 20 years later, World War II broke out. The treaty's biggest weakness was that it wasn't harsh enough to prevent Germany from recovering as a great power, and it wasn't lax enough to prevent national victimhood. Story 34. I didn't need to reach adulthood to realize it was false, but the most outlandish thing I heard from a teacher was that the reason there weren't many professional black swimmers was because black people had trouble swimming because their skin was heavier. He didn't seem to mean it in a bad way. He seemed to think, wow, biology is such a weird, amazing thing. Look at that mind-blowing factoid. And nobody challenged him really hard. He wasn't a science teacher, thankfully. Otherwise, my French language teachers lied by telling us to never put a comma before it, along with a few other rules that are constantly broken even by highly regarded authors and scholars. I don't recall exactly the details, but teachers used to exaggerate the effects of marijuana. Like, we'd have a module on alcohol and tobacco, and one on crack, heroin, and marijuana. Story 35. That leaving water running is wasting water. As in, the water, once down the drain, is gone forever. We were taught to minimize water usage. Turn on the shower to wet your body, turn the water off, lather your body with soap, turn the water back on, and quickly rinse off. To keep the water off while brushing teeth. To not flush if you've only urinated. Complete BS. Does water need to be treated after going down the drain? Yes. Does it vanish from the universe? No. I understand water conservation is necessary during severe droughts and in certain areas that lack fresh water, but we were in the suburbs of a major city on the shores of one of the Great Lakes. We have plenty of fresh water. Story 36. Well, I'm not really an adult, but I'm very close to becoming one legally. I was in health class one day, and we were learning about sexual health in teens and young adults. I was interested just because I wanted to stay aware of what was out there to help me stay safe and explore my sexuality comfortably, like any reasonable person would. I learned in the process that without birth control, and if a woman is ovulating/fertile, there's a 25% chance she could get pregnant, or somewhere around this range. I don't know if this is right, but wanting to go into a biology major really helped me to put this information into context, and it was indeed reasonable. Ever since my childhood, my mother would tell me that every time I had sex, I would get pregnant, and I would end up in poverty like her entire side of the family. She's the first woman on her side of the family to not get pregnant or have a kid before turning 18. This scared me from exploring my sexuality, as my mother would always say that boys only want sex. This tainted my view of men. Even to this day, as a better educated woman, I'm about to become at 17 years old. I'm straight, so I'm naturally attracted to boys, but I always think that every guy I talk to likes me, slash has a crush on me, slash wants to have sex, and I know better today that I can have guy friends that just want to be friends and hang out and have fun. So, a note to this young lady and to any girls, young women that may be listening to this video. It's not always true, but in most cases, guys that are overly friendly or overly social with girls, yeah, they do have an ulterior motive. It's just how we're wired. We don't want to just be really good friends with pretty girls. You know what I mean? It's a primal thing. It's something that we don't really have control over. And again, I don't want to throw a blanket over every single male in the human species, but by and large, that's what dudes are after. So, ladies, be careful out there and definitely keep your guard up, especially if you're not looking for like a relationship or a hookup. Story 37. 4 things. Gum will last in your stomach forever, even though it's digestible. Glasses are for nerds, even though damn near everyone wears glasses because our LCD/OLED screens are worsening our vision. Also, there's nothing wrong with nerds. Those same nerds are advancing our technology to contribute to human advancement and economy, advancing our political structure, etc. If you swallow a watermelon seed, a watermelon will grow in your stomach, even though that makes no sense because your stomach acid will break down the seed. And video games rot the mind. Honestly, this is only sort of true if you don't do anything else to develop your brain, such as reading books/educational material, doing some form of problem solving, such as puzzles/practicing mathematics, and applying them in STEM fields, etc., even though there's several genres of games that are puzzle-based to improve problem solving and hand-eye coordination, to be aware of your surroundings and how you can use certain items with your hands. Story 38. Okay, I don't know how much of a rant this will be, but let's go. My primary teacher was so effing dumb. I don't know how much I was taught that was wrong, but I have 3 facts that weren't typically misinformation that I can remember that were wrong. First, she tried to teach us that 3 roots go straight down into the ground and don't branch out. A kid asked what about the roots you can see next to trees, and she snapped at him for making stuff up. Fortunately, a teacher aide came in to drop papers off, and she called out my teacher for being wrong. Second was that she taught us that humans breathe in air and exhale waste. Everything else breathes in waste and exhales oxygen. Trees, cats, dogs, everything other than humans breathe out oxygen. I only realized that was wrong probably in grade 5. Lastly, I have the worst one. I'm going to guess this was during African History Month, and she taught us that Africans were disgusting monsters who needed to be locked up because they were dangerous and they have huge tusks and warts and used to bury under prison walls to escape. That summer I went to visit on my father's side and they had a poster of these black people, and I was confused since they didn't look like what I thought they would have, so I asked what the picture was. I forget what exactly it was. I think it had something to do with the Underground Railroad, and after hearing the explanation of it, I asked where their warts and tusks were, and why did they look like people. My grandmother was horrified with what I asked, but I never told her why I thought that. I just said that I heard it. Story 39. That teachers are right. No, some of them are effing waste buckets. My neighbor, who is a teacher of 32 years, always shut their front door when our house is empty, just so they can pretend that they didn't know crap if something happens. She also, over the years, tried to dissuade 2 of her sons to not be too close friends with me as I'm a bad student, because I have lower grades than they do and I hung out and socialized more. Now her 2 sons are basically the Asian equivalent of basement-dwelling incels who can't effing read the room to save their asses out of a wet paper bag. Story 40. I was taught that there was its, and its. I didn't find out until I was in my 30s that its doesn't exist. You just use its, which A, made me feel better because I was always confused as to where you use the possessive apostrophe when some words didn't need it, and I could never figure out the tell of knowing where, like the graves on French E or A, which direction they go, and B, a bit upset for all the markdown tests that were returned to me for not using it where I was supposed to. It's stupid, but I was one of those students that always got A's on everything, so that was a point of anxiety and stress for me for many years, that I couldn't figure out where to use it. Story 41. That Columbus discovered America. I guess he kinda did discover it from where he was sitting, but now that I'm older and have traveled all across this country and seen all the different reservations and natives, I guess I've really gotten to see firsthand that there were plenty of people here doing life stuff long before Columbus discovered this place. In school, we were taught that there were natives here, but it was presented like there was just a handful of scattered tribes, when in actuality, there were thousands spread all across the country. They literally had towns and stuff built. I just kind of feel like the version of American history that I was taught in school wasn't at all how it really happened. Story 42. How to do math, apparently, because that is not how my fourth grader is going to do math, and even though I studied engineering in college, I'm a complete effing moron when it comes time to help my crotch fruit with her long division. That you can be anything you want to be if you study enough and work hard. That might have been true if having money were factored in, but even then, there are some things that have a very low success rate. That my mind was brilliant, and that perfect LSAT score meant I was going to go on to do great things in life. Ask my former gifted kid out there who peaked too soon how brilliant they feel now. I'm not only no more intelligent than anyone else, but I've learned over the past 2 decades that I'm actually a complete idiot. But I'm an idiot who has really good autobiographical memory and critical thinking skills and still manages to F up regularly. If everything comes easily to you as a kid and you're never challenged, you don't know what the F to do when you're older and challenges arise. Story 43. Gum will stay in your stomach forever. My history teacher told us about what happened to her daughter, and apparently it was from swallowing gum. She had to have surgery. Doctors took out something in her stomach, forgot what it was, and she was reduced to just having to crawl around. Then that's why you don't swallow gum. When I got home, I looked it up, and gum doesn't actually get stuck in there forever. It just comes out like anything else but causes constipation. Whatever caused her daughter to be reduced to a crawl was probably from something else other than the gum. Story 44. The first time I was ever in a fight was to stop a bully from picking on this smaller kid. The bully kept pushing him onto the ground and wouldn't let him up. I ran over, on the playground roughly 10 years old, and shoved him off. He threw a punch at me, missed, and I punched him back. The kid getting bullied had already gotten up and told the teacher, who apparently only saw me punch the bully. Fast forward to the principal's office. He asked why I did it. I explained the bully situation. He asked why I got physical. I said, I saw him bullying the other kid and I saw red. I was so angry that I had to stop him. The principal's response? So you couldn't control yourself. If you had a gun, you would have shot him dead. I walked away thinking, wow, that was so smart, when in reality, it was probably the most insane thing any teacher has ever said to me. Story 45. That the German army did so well at first in World War II because they had the best tech, best tanks, best generals, yada yada yada. In reality, they conquered a bunch of countries way weaker than them, via defeat in detail. They clapped France, their only real victory against a par adversary, because France essentially didn't want to fight and continued not wanting to fight so much that they deluded themselves and weren't even remotely ready for the invasion. Then they slowly got dismantled by the USSR and Great Britain because they really weren't all that good. Gonna get some mad words on here, but fight me. The Nazi Germany war machine got lucky surprise attacking a bunch of unprepared neighbors, who then slowly and methodically fed them their own asses once they got their crap together and actually fought back. Oh, and German tanks were crap. Story 46. That all the American founding fathers and basically any famous white man from history before the 20th century were good, Bible-believing Christians. That the earth was formed in 6,000 years. That women getting the right to vote and the Beatles coming to America were the downfall of America. That slavery was part of God's plan because black people were descendants of Noah's son Ham, who God cursed. That all music except for hymns was satanic. That women shouldn't wear pants. That not having a nuclear family somehow ruins the world or something. I'm a millennial, by the way. Story 47. That you can't make money doing art. Anything is a viable job if you work at it and find the right opportunities. You can't always pick and choose, but the better you get, the more you can. Want to draw? There's plenty of drawing jobs. You gonna get famous drawing? Probably not, but companies need art. Music, same thing. You might play bass for 3 local bands in a studio, but you can make money learning music. I grew up during a time when if you weren't immediately the best at something, you should quit. And if you weren't world famous, you weren't successful at it. Capitalism made me into a laborer, and now I don't make a viable living doing something I hate, and my love for things I liked has mostly dried up. Story 48. Not elementary, but I went back to college in my late 20s and got into it with an algebra professor who told the class that if the computers went down, they would need to know how to calculate by hand. At this point, I've had corporate jobs, mostly in finance, for nearly 10 years, and explained that when the computers are down, the corporations will want you to wait till they're back up. They don't trust our calculations, knowing the technology will be back within a day at the most. Story 49. You can't graduate high school/college without being able to write in cursive. I took this super seriously, as I've always wanted to pursue higher education. Like, so seriously, my handwriting became cursive. I wouldn't write any way else and worry that one mess up would end my whole academic career as an adult. Plot twist being I never ended up graduating high school, against my will, and my handwriting still is 90% cursive. I actively have to tone it down so people can read it in my adult life, including at the college prep center, since things are getting back on track now. Story 50. That Miss was only a title for women who have never been married, and that if you're divorced, you're supposed to use Miss, and can never use Ms. again. I learned this from a reading teacher. I didn't question it until about 6th grade and was like, wait, that can't be right. Same school district employed a teacher who 100% believed that her husband was gone because he was abducted by aliens, thought dubstep permanently damaged kids' brains, and that art has no lines in it. So if your art has lines, it's not real art. She was an art teacher. I failed for using lines. Story 51. To this day, I still think of this. So in elementary school, we had some local politician come in to talk about their job, and I was a kid, I had no idea who this guy was. They said, politician, and I thought, oh, this guy must be the president then. Whoever this guy was who came to that 3rd grade classroom, he was nuts. He started ranting at us about how we were the do-nothing generation and how we wouldn't amount to anything our entire lives. He yelled at us for no reason, and our teacher was clearly terrified and shocked by this. But the screwed up thing? I internalized that for so long. I thought, well, if the president came all this way to tell us specifically, there must be a hard evidence supporting that. So I gave up. I didn't try for the major part of my elementary and middle school years, and it took me through half of high school to think back and go, hold on, that makes no sense. Who even was that psycho? Who even says that to elementary school kids? Story 52. Luminiferous ether is a substance in space that the stars and comets, etc. are in. The firmament is the dome above the earth that lies between the sky and heaven. God made America for pilgrims to clear and inhabit. Native Americans were heathens and savages that needed to be taught that their God was a false god, and they needed to be taught what is right. The Native Americans believed that God was the sun, and that's stupid because you can't see God. Non-white people were cursed by God and were so dirty you can't wash off the stains in their skin, and they go to their soul. Public school, Utah, about 1980. I felt really bad for the Navajo kid in our class while all that bullcrap was going down. Story 53. I have no idea where I heard this, but I could have sworn that I learned somewhere that during the U.S. Civil War, England almost came into the war on the side of the South. Sort of a, you colonies fought a whole war with us over whether or not you could be your own country, and now you don't want to let someone else be their own country? We'll show you, sort of a thing. The only reason that England didn't come into the war was because the North decided to make slavery an issue in the war, and since England had just outlawed slavery themselves, they decided they shouldn't support the South. Complete nonsense, but I was so sure I had learned that when I learned about the Civil War. Story 54. That the native peoples of what's now called America were treated fairly. They're still treated unfairly today, but back then it was blatant genocide. Never got any sort of education that reflected the reality about that part of our history until college age. Very, very disturbing how much was lied about. Not just by omission, but explicitly lied about by those defining curriculum in schools. I'm glad it's getting slightly better here now, but it's still not good, and still abysmal in most places. Story 55. Red, yellow, and blue aren't the primary colors. I'm not an adult yet, but still, why are we taught that? The primary colors of subtractive color mixing are cyan, magenta, and yellow, and the primary colors of additive color mixing are red, green, and blue. It frustrates me that we were taught wrong. I remember taking over half of art class just trying to find a decent purple that I liked. I knew they existed, but I was never going to get there easily with red, yellow, and blue paint. Now who's with me? Story 56. I'm nauseous from even brief interaction with individual conscious systems of behavior, It appears that the masses at the bottom of the pyramid are indeed impervious to intellectual evolution. You fools cannot be taught. Also, yeah, I'm drunk, and kick me off or ban or whatever this nonsense. I dare one of you to have the conceptual confidence to engage in a direct conversation with an integrated mind motivated by the wraith potential on energy. Story 57. I was in elementary school during the 70s, and other than the usual founding father myths like George Washington chopping down a cherry tree, our science teacher told us that in 1999, all 9 at the time, the planets were going to line up in a row and that the gravity changes from the alignment would affect the Earth. In reality, that is not something that was going to happen, and did not, as the last time all the planets in Pluto lined up in a row was in the year 949, and next time they will be in a row is sometime in 2492. So just to elaborate upon this, even if/when that really did happen, with every planet being in perfect alignment, the gravity on Earth wouldn't change, not one bit. So no, don't believe the stories of if you jump up into the air, you're going to temporarily float and be airborne for a couple of seconds. That's a load of garbage. Story 58. I used to think my pre-K teacher lied when she said anyone could be president in that room. I was so bitter when I got older and reflected on that statement. Then Obama happened and I realized she didn't lie. Oh, Thanksgiving history you're taught in school is mostly a lie. They painted Christopher Columbus like some brave hero and skipped over his horrific mindset and the horrible things he did to the natives. First thing dude thinks about when seeing people is, hey, they would make good slaves, lol. It's not like they really lie, they just omit a lot of the truth. Story 60. That Christopher Columbus totally discovered America and he was a really cool guy who got along with the Native Americans and absolutely nothing bad happened. There was a Native American kid in my class whose eye twitched every time there was a lesson on Columbus, presumably because his parents told him what Columbus was really like. Also, they kept trying to tell us that Columbus was the one who figured out the Earth is round, even though a few grades later, they'd tell us it was actually the ancient Greeks. Story 61. So, like this teacher, Mr. Walker, was the only black teacher in the whole elementary school, and most of the students liked him. He was an ordinary 4th grade teacher in an institution where the only other POC employee was the crosswalk attendant. Anyway, I was in 5th grade at the time, and I did remember hearing my teacher discuss something with another teacher during recess. He said that because of budget cuts, they had to fire one teacher at random, and that the decided teacher was essentially going to be an RNG lottery pool. Could be anyone. Could be him, could be the newest teacher they just hired that year. You can guess what happened. He was walked out of campus in the middle of the day with his things and sent home. All the teachers stood outside their doors to clap for him in recognition of his service as an act of thanks from the staff. Didn't strike me at the time as anything wrong because, well, I was 10, and I was like, damn, that sucks, and nothing really hit me at the time. Years later, I realized how effed up that was, and I doubt any chance of it being legit. Budget cuts? We got our blacktop done over the summer, hired a new teacher for the 6th grade class, and just installed solar panels in the parking lot that year as well. I call BS. Story 62. The pyramids of Giza weren't built by slaves. They were actually volunteers who purposely wanted to be part of a great legacy, and their appearance was black. African black, not Middle Eastern. In fact, right next to the pyramids, there were smaller tombs for the servants and high priest. Next to them were even smaller graves and tombs for the volunteers. Even their families were buried there. Archaeologists and scientists studied the bones of these people and found out that they were well-nourished and well-fed and buried there with prized treasures, ornaments made of gold. What kind of king does this for his slaves? Newsflash, this pharaoh cared about his people, and the people greatly respected and loved their pharaoh. R.I.P. to the great pharaoh Khufu and your people. May the eye of Amun-Ra guide you all into the afterlife. May the wings of Horus glide you through the glades of the grand beyond. May you look upon the knowledge of Anubis without fear. Your legacy will always be here. Story 63. I vividly remember arguing with my teacher about whether or not Alabama had palm trees. We lived in Michigan, but I was moving to Alabama at the end of the year to be closer to family we had there. I had been to Alabama every single year, sometimes twice a year, since the day I was born. My teacher kept telling me that palm trees only exist in Florida and Southern California in the US. I remember saying, but Alabama and Florida are neighbors. My grandparents live in Alabama and they have palm trees. I remember her getting really angry about all the other students talking about it. So she turned the lights off and made us all put our heads down. I have another memory of bringing a Christmas card my grandparents had sent us to her class. It had their address on it and a picture of my grandparents, me, my 3 siblings, and my 3 cousins in front of their house in Alabama, standing next to a cluster of palm trees. She told me to go put it in my locker across the hall, and I hung it up on the outside with a magnet, something we were allowed to do. My locker was directly across the hall from her door, so if she looked up, she would have seen it every day. I thought those 2 memories were a weird dream until my parents moved houses and we went through old stuff. Found a yearbook from 5th grade where someone wrote, "Alabama doesn't have palm trees," and someone else wrote, "I will miss you like Florida misses the palm trees Alabama stole." Edit. I definitely commented on the wrong sub. They both had the word elementary in them, but I'm gonna leave this here anyway, lol. Story 54. So in 5th grade, my teacher told the class that in the American South, it's taught that the Confederacy won the Civil War. I asked why that was, and he didn't have an answer. I was very confused as to why that was, as it didn't make sense. Flash forward some years and I asked someone I knew who grew up in the South if this was true, and he said that was the dumbest thing a teacher ever told me. He was perplexed that while at times some people from the North boast about their educational background compared to the South, while they're literally teaching us small dumb lies. Story 55. Quick note, this is kind of a personal thing for me, and more involving middle school and high school than elementary. When I was young, I liked to make very emo art with lots of monsters, very heavy on the colors red and black. The poetry I would write was likewise really dark. My dad had a huge stroke when I was a kid and he couldn't work, so we went from a normal standard of living to, I don't know what we're going to do about dinner or if we'll be homeless soon, pretty much overnight. Art and poetry were a way for me to let go of some of the pain. My art teacher in school told me my art looked like prison art. My writing teacher told me my poetry sounded like I was going to go to Columbine. I didn't feel seen or like anyone thought I mattered, and for a while I gave up on art. Fast forward several years. I'm now married, and in a few months I'll be graduating with a degree in art education, certified to teach art K through 12. Even before COVID, there were a lot of kids hurting, and for them, making art is a release. Just because it makes you uncomfortable doesn't mean they're monsters. I was treated like an outcast for my interests, and as a teacher, I look forward to making my class a place where those students can feel comfortable and safe, and seen. Story 56. Canadian history, and American too. The version I learned in elementary school definitely glazed over the whole natives getting effed over thing. As an adult, reading books and taking actual courses in university on the subject, I'm continually disgusted at the lack of education on the subject for my generation. I sought out answers and educated myself as much as I could, and still continue to do so, but for those who don't, still really have no clue how bad it was, and still is. Story 57. The origin of the Brazilian feijoada. So here in Brazil, we're taught in school that our typical dish was created by slaves using leftovers discarded by the slave owners. The dish would then eventually make its way into our popular culture. However, there's plenty of discussion, with evidence, that this story was all made up, or at least propagated, during the military dictatorship in the 60s to enforce a sense of cultural identity and ownership, while the actual origin of the feijoada would be in elite-class restaurants that would serve this Brazilian version of the cassoulet, a French dish. There's a lot of other details and room for discussion, but it was fun to discover it anyway. Story 58. When I was in 4th grade, we learned about a previously uncontacted, Stone Age-like tribe living in caves in the Philippines. Nobody spoke their language, and you had to go through 2 interpreters to understand them, but they had no words for war or weapons. There was a section about them in our social studies textbook, articles in National Geographic, etc. I remember making a poster board display and doing a presentation about their diet. I remember stuff like grubs and roots and fish. Turns out that diet didn't really have enough calories to support the active, foraging lifestyle they supposedly lived. And oh yeah, actually it was a big hoax perpetrated by the Marcos regime. Some anthropologists had suspicions all along, but anyone who asked too many questions just had their access to the tribe cut off. Story 59. We were taught some bullcrap about the first Thanksgiving, when the Indians, that's what the teacher called them, taught the Pilgrims how to grow corn. And then they all sat down to a cheerful turkey dinner together. We even put on a little play to reenact this fantasy. I had to cut out a vest from a paper grocery bag and make a proper headband with a brightly colored feather hot glued to it so I could be an Indian for the play. We were also told that none of the Indians had any religion or any sort of money before the colonists came along. They just bartered everything, and that only the 5 civilized tribes had writing. And of course, Columbus was the first person to discover North America, and this was in Oklahoma. Story 60. That contributing to society and always being a good, dutiful person is a social responsibility we have to carry from birth to death, and the consequences for ignoring it are usually immense. However, what happens if you only want to live a life doing nothing and just have fun and live it to the fullest, exploring, drawing, and reminiscing all of it? Is it selfish to relive memories? I mean, I think it's only natural to relive such memories, but society apparently doesn't demand that and only wants everyone to become an occupied, functioning, responsible, active individual of society. Work harder and harder so that you can make money, waste your life, and live the rest of it like useless used goods when you become too old. A more sophisticated way of saying a slave. I guess feeling flawed and being our own worst enemy is the price we pay for our so-called superior intelligence, since no other animal has it this bad. They never doubt their free will because all the social oiling they do is coded into their instincts. So when said true feelings aren't to become smart or successful or live longer, I feel like I'm a broken piece of goods. Story 61. You can't take 3 from 2. That would be just crazy. If there are 2 apples on the table, you can't take 3 apples away. Yes, you can. You get -1. People can use this to talk about debts they owe or the height of things that are below ground level. But you can't take the square root of -1. That would be just crazy, because any real number multiplied by itself is a positive number. But yes, you can. You get I, the imaginary unit. People can use this to talk about things moving in circles, as well as the way that light and electricity work. If you're counting the sheep in your herd, all you need is the natural numbers, 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on. If you're a banker keeping track of who owes whom how many sheep, you need positive and negative numbers. Skipping ahead several thousand years, if you're measuring alternating current signals in an electrical wire, you need complex numbers. That's just how the world is. Story 62. Names ending in an S denote the possessive as follows. Shay's Rebellion. It is incorrect to write Shay's Rebellion. In reality, both are correct and it's a matter of a preference. My BFF was once told sapphire wasn't a color, and I was told turquoise wasn't a gemstone. We knew that was wrong at the time, though. Last time we bothered to pay any attention to that English teacher, lol. Yes, we were told by the same teacher, who clearly needed a refresher on the subject she was teaching. I was also told by a different teacher that I could not use any fragment in an essay, even when the fragment was a translation of a quote in another language. This felt off to me, but I accepted I was wrong. As it turns out, translations are actually one of the few exceptions to the no fragments rule. In college, I was marked down for writing a run-on sentence. I pointed out that the sentence wasn't a run-on. I'd used semicolons and the sentence was grammatically correct, albeit more archaic in structure. So she marked me down for using old-fashioned grammar. No, I didn't respect a word she said after that. Seriously, you're teaching college writing. Learn the difference between a comma and a semicolon, please. Story 63. When I was a teacher, I used to tell them when they were being truly challenging after many warnings, do that one more time and we'll step into the hall and call your grandmama right here and now. Her number is ready and waiting in my phone. You let me know if what you're doing now is worth that to you. I never once had to call anyone's grandma, nor did I intend to. Mostly because I taught in communities where grandmas didn't mess around. I was scared of them too, lol. Plus, as my kids would say, I ain't no snitch. So chances are the teacher isn't really going to call your parent/grandparent right then and there. Truly, there's no time for that. Story 64. I knew it was a lie when I first heard it because I'm not stupid. Plus, I have family in Alaska. But in 2nd grade, we had a lady talking to my class about all the places she'd been to in the world, including the year she spent living in Alaska. She told us that in winter, the sun was up all day, and because of that, she nearly lost her white cat in the snow because he blended in so well, and the glare from the winter midnight sun made it hard to see. I'm just sitting there as a little kid thinking, lady, you've got some facts mixed up there. Story 65. Poem we had to commit to memory. I went to a private school. Yes, it sucked. Ahem. One day, in the middle of the night, 2 dead boys got up to fight. They faced each other, back to back, drew their swords and shot each other. A deaf policeman heard the noise, came and shot the 2 dead boys. If you still don't believe this lie is true, ask the blind man. He saw it too. Yes, I typed this from memory. It was designed to teach us irony. I still have no idea what it means, and I have 2 master's degrees and am currently in second year on a JD. I would love to know if anyone else had to learn this. Story 66. You will need to know MLA formatting for college. The field that I'm studying in, anthropology, uses APA. My classes that have been writing intensive that aren't in an English department class have all used Chicago. In fact, many of the writing styles of MLA are things that are not wanted in a lot of fields. MLA tells you to always write in the present tense, to use direct quotes to avoid rephrasing. We're often told to reference the work that the idea came from, but avoid using direct quotes unless absolutely necessary. Also, someone wrote a paper in the past based on evidence and work done in the past. Keeping that in the correct context is really important for discussing the body of work and keeping the focus on the material itself. Story 67. I learned that there's a single act of consistency that can help me out in bringing my first PlayStation and to turn my other wishes into reality for my parents. I literally didn't ever want to go to school, but I can see people saying, I love my school-going time, but I'm going to assure you at that time, hardly a person wished to go to school. Though there is still a child left who forced me to write this, the fact is, without going to school, it would not be possible for me to write and analyze this as efficiently as I'm doing right now. The statement that I heard from the school level was, your next standard will be much easier. But believe me, it was even 1,000 times tougher than the previous class. What the hell is this person talking about? Is that kind of the point of the post? I've read this thing probably 3 or 4 times and still have absolutely no clue what they're talking about. Loaded gibberish. Moving on. Story 68. My second grade teacher said that the land that is currently the United States was once completely unoccupied, and Christopher Columbus and the Native Americans were in a race of sorts to get there first. She says that nobody truly knows who got there first. I learned that was wrong the same day when I went home and told my brother about it, and he set me straight. I even went back to school the next day and told my teacher, but she was persistent that we don't know if the Native Americans were here first. SMH. I even went as far as making a petition that was basically, sign this if you think that the Native Americans were here first. She confiscated it. Story 69. I went to a Roman Catholic primary school. Some of these were taught to me by teachers, and the last by the headmaster himself from his own personal experience. Until I was in my late teens, I legitimately believed that men had one less rib than women because God used Adam's rib to make Eve, or that was just the story people attributed it to, despite this not being a real thing at all. That the rock in Jerusalem that Jesus' corpse was laid to rest on for 3 days has been scientifically proven to have signs of being struck by lightning 2,000 years ago, despite there being multiple of these supposed rocks and they won't let anyone test them. That the Catholic priests in Lourdes, France let people bathe in the water there and tell you not to dry yourself off after, but to put your clothes straight on, and miraculously, you're somehow completely dry as you do. My headmaster swore this was true in an assembly after his pilgrimage there in an assembly to the entire school is proof of miracles. Story 70. If you want to be successful in life, you need to be good at school. Well, I witnessed my friends and family who's not good at school. They judged by the school society as a failure, or bad, or those things negative they told you. Some teacher even said, you will not be successful with your life. Turns out, those people who skip class, smoke in school, get drunk, etc., have more friends and will eventually meet some interesting people and will eventually grow up and be a much, much better person than the teacher's favorite. They have the experiences to tackle problems and will do so calmly. They will have better links with people because of their adventurous life. Story 71. Our school principal said that walking away or telling the student that you didn't like being bullied would make them stop, and if they kept going, telling an adult would get it fixed. And if that didn't work, suspending them would work. No, the bully isn't going to just say, oh, I wasn't trying to hurt your feelings, I'm sorry. Let's be friends and I'll try to be better in the future. They don't give a flying rat's ass about you or your feelings. And what's the adult going to say? Don't bully that kid. Do they think the bully is going to have some sort of realization that they're just being a dick? No. In suspension, they just see it as a vacation. Oh, they fail all the assignments they had during suspension? They don't care. Oh, the parents are going to care? 9 times out of 10, they don't give a F. To all the principals that thought this, you were honestly one of the slowest people on the planet. And honestly, osmium is less effing dense than you. Okay, rant over. Story 72. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Total bullcrap. I'm a woman. We still have not passed the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment, The Equal Rights Amendment is a proposed amendment to the United States Constitution designed to guarantee equal legal rights for all American citizens regardless of sex. It seeks to end the legal distinctions between men and women in terms of divorce, property, employment, and other matters. So, no liberty and justice for women. But I'm not a person of color, or a part of LGBTQ+, or an immigrant, or particularly religious. As it stands now, I'm a disgusted American, purposely not capitalized, because after the blatant murders / incarceration / mistreatment of people of color / trans folks, add your favorite group of folks to hate, I'm certain that no one believes that garbage anymore. Story 73. English class. Words like foods, peoples, fishes do not exist. I get the point why they wanted to force us to avoid having a bad habit of using them, but whatever. You'll never have a calculator in your pockets. You gotta learn all these formulas because you won't be able to look them up in a book later. Memorizing all those useless pieces of information and then regurgitate them the next day just to completely forget the whole thing a week later. Education completely ignored the fast-paced development of the IT sector and still cannot keep up with it and lags behind. Cheating will not get you anything, and you'll get caught and punished for it. I tried to cheat once during a biology test in high school, failed, and never did since then. But for God's sake, what are corruption and lobby? The most ridiculous one, having a university diploma will solve your money issues. F me. So I talked about this earlier, but I'm just going to reiterate the point again. Those that grew up in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, before IT, internet, and telecommunications really took off, you really did have to learn these things and commit it to memory because you couldn't just pull your phone open and Google the answers to certain questions. You had to read a book and study intensively on how to do certain things, specific crafts, and now you can just pull up a YouTube video. So these were essential back then when you didn't just have a quick reference guide sitting in your pocket, that being your telephone. Ergo, it was essential to have a college degree because that proves that you had gone through the prerequisite training and studying in order to work in said fields, whereas now you can just access all of that information on the internet. Story 74. Okay, this sounds daft because I'm Dutch, but I grew up in the UAE. So most people know that world-famous Dutch artist Vincent van Gogh died by self-unaliving. Well, we learned that he was so broke he couldn't afford food and just died. I get not explaining self-unaliving to third graders, but I only found out a few years later when I returned to go to the Van Gogh Museum. Yeah, same with the end of World War II. We didn't learn what happened to Hitler, just kind of went, oh yeah, and then they dropped the atomic bomb and the war ended. Me being the little crap that I was said, didn't Hitler commit self-unaliving at the end of the war? Yeah, I got sent out. TLDR, in the UAE was told Vincent van Gogh died of starvation because he was broke, and when I mentioned Hitler's self-unaliving, I got sent out. Edit. Just remembered the same with Theseus and the Minotaur. His dad didn't jump off a cliff after seeing the black sails. He just got very scared and had a heart attack. Man, who knows what else was falsely told. Story 75. That college would be harder. College was/can be hard, but you go into it expecting to learn what you go in for. It's no different than elementary school. If anything, elementary was way harder. Not understanding any of the fundamentals being taught, having to wear a uniform, paid lunches that they chose for you, and only have a good meal 25% of the time, teachers getting mad at you for literally not understanding something you've never had any experience with, dealing with other little a-holes that don't know any better, the information being taught to you is controlled more by parents and the surrounding community, having a therapist to talk to instead of a counselor that tells your parents everything. College debt sucks for sure, but my 4 college years were 100 times better and easier than my 5 years in elementary. Story 76. Sometimes no one is at fault. Someone is always to blame for any accident or conflict, especially if it's work or driving related. Whether you failed to plan ahead, or really clumsy, or just refusing to take responsibility, you or someone else is probably to blame for some kind of damage. Even though there are accidents where technically no one is to blame, the police will usually find something that either you or someone else failed to do, and that's what caused whatever problem you're now all having to deal with. I'm pretty sure it was something that teachers in elementary school would say because they just didn't want to have to deal with a bunch of crying brats who couldn't play well with others. Unfortunately, it taught me the wrong lesson. Unfortunately, when you become an adult, legal battles and court cases can be far more harsh when it comes to who was it that screwed up. Story 77. We're going to teach you math today. Never once in my K-12 experience was I taught math. I was taught arithmetic. None of my teachers understood math at all. Want to learn algebra with no numbers? Here we go. I always take my keys, wallet, and phone with me every day. Today I can start my car and buy gas, so what did I forget? That's right, the phone. W plus K plus P equals EDC. W plus K equals parentheses negative P, close parentheses, plus parentheses, EDC, close parentheses. I guarantee that none of my teachers could come up with an equation or explain any mathematical logic. Math was just a set of rote things they did in response to stimuli and never knew how to apply it. If your teachers could, I'm happy for you. Mine were not given opportunities to deviate from the program enough to do anything like actually teach us. Story 78. That stupid if you swallow gum thing, 7 years later it will come out. My smart little first grade self conducted an experiment and swallowed a piece of gum and wrote the date on my calendar. I completely forgot about it for about 4 years, so I'm in 5th and just got my first phone and looked through that old calendar too, but birthday's in my phone and saw it, and I thought, well, the 7 years isn't up yet and everyone had told me it wasn't real, but I was a 5th grader who trusted no one, so I set a reminder for 3 years later, which somehow got transferred to the new phone I had gotten about 2 years later. Then one day I got a little buzz in my back pocket in 8th grade math class and saw a reminder to watch my poop for gum. There was no gum. Story 79. My woman teacher was very internally misogynistic. She always forced the idea of abstinence as well as dressing modestly on us, 12-year-olds, and when my older sister had her as a teacher, she'd pick on girls who showed a little skin, calling them misogynistic names like whore, slut, attention seeker, and even said things like, "Are you even wearing underwear?" If they were wearing a thong, she'd say, "Who are you trying to look so good for?" Anyways, in health class, this crazy female dog tried to convince us if we didn't wipe properly after crapping, then put our thong on and walked around, the thong would move back and forth and the leftover crap that went on the thong would be rubbed off into our vaginas and give us infections. I will admit, I've had many messy poops in my day, and I've worn G-strings religiously for the past 7 years of my life, and have never gotten crap particles up my vagina. Neither has anyone with a vagina I've ever met. Just makes me think either this woman just pulled this info out of her ass, pun intended, or she just tried to fearmonger little girls into not wearing what she thinks is promiscuous clothing. Yeah, so, you know what? I think it's probably better that we don't talk about that one. Moving on. Story 80. What you do in school stays on your permanent record. Short of actually breaking the law, there's no record that extends beyond the school itself. When I left my elementary school and went to high school, they didn't even know I was there because I was constantly getting in trouble for fighting. Not starting them. I was bullied a little as a kid, up until people figured out I had a bit of a temper and would absolutely throw it back, often much harder. And my parents wanted me to be somewhere with more of a focus on discipline. It was a completely fresh start. It actually kind of worked in my favor as I got to grow up and mellow out on my own without being treated like a criminal from a young age. You can do anything you put your mind to and work for. Honestly, didn't learn the truth behind this until I graduated high school, and even then it didn't fully set in until after college. Here in my 30s, I can speak with some authority on it. Yes, some will rise above their station and beat the odds, but there's a reason that's noteworthy. The vast majority of the population is limited by opportunity above any other potential hurdle. Certain people do lead that charmed, privileged life where all they need to do is will something into existence. Most do not. I came from a middle-class family myself. I attended nicer private schools, had parents who could have helped pay for college if I didn't get a scholarship. They bought me my first car, helped cover rent while I was in school, helped me get my first job, etc. I know people who grew up in much worse situations who never had any of those opportunities and had to settle for much less, had to embrace the struggle and ultimately mediocrity. But I also went to those fancy private schools with a lot of affluent kids living lives well beyond what my family and I could imagine. People who got shipped off to top colleges or handed high-paying positions in family businesses or hooked up with easy paths to promotion through connections. There are absolutely levels in this world, and you can spend your whole life trying to transcend yours in vain and get nowhere. That's why I'm a strong proponent for programs that generate a sort of equity, that give disadvantaged people an opportunity they wouldn't otherwise have. Those get scoffed at sometimes as handouts or unfair, but I mean, yeah, the whole idea is taking those handouts and advantages privileged folk are getting and giving someone else a shot. Life is unfair left unchecked. We have to force that balance. All that said, that privilege doesn't always pan out. The pendulum swings both ways. Not everyone in this world will be successful and happy, even with an advantage. Hell, we wouldn't really have a metric for success without the potential for failure. So take me versus my sister. Same upbringing, same or similar schools, similar personalities/outlooks, but my luck and timing is nearly non-existent. As she moved up in the world, she would just build on it. Hurdles, of course, but no major setbacks. On my end, every single time I've made significant progress, it's been met with some giant obstacle out of my control. All I can do is try to get around it and keep moving, but man, I gotta tell you, I'm tired of the detours. The lives we live as a result are incomparable today. She just bought a condo in Cali. I'll be lucky to afford any house before I'm 50, but even still I have, and am thankful for, a safety net that I know others in similar predicaments would not have. That's my advantage, my privilege. There's nothing wrong with acknowledging it. There's everything wrong with actively trying to prevent others from having it. But I digress. Sure, put your mind to whatever and work hard at it, but also do everything you can to try and secure an advantage. It's more key to your success than any of that shallow motivational bootstraps bullcrap. Story 81. In secondary school, like middle plus high school I guess, but things like you could make any color of light by mixing red, blue, and green, primary colors. It wasn't until my late 20s I discovered how false that was, though if I had thought about it hard at the time, I would have had my doubts, and that isn't even beginning to worry about violet. The USA nearly adopted German as an official language, said by a history teacher who was generally pretty good. Of course, this was pre-internet, so he had no way to check it any more than I did. You believed things you read more then than now. Sadly, in my case, I absolutely did need pens and cursive in secondary school, and my inability to use them/write it seriously hampered my life. I'm severely dyslexic, and this did not help. Nor did I always have a calculator with me. Mobile phones did exist by the time I left school, but they were not smart. I'm so glad all those things aren't true anymore. Story 82. That college is a billion times harder than high school. Your professors won't ever accept late work. You'll never be allowed to miss a single class, and they'll lock the door once class starts, so no being late either. You'll have hours of homework in every class, every night. All your classes will be 3 hours long. If you get even one thing wrong on a test, you'll fail out entirely and kicked out, etc., etc. Turns out, college was the easiest time I've ever had in school. Professors were super chill, accepted late stuff all the time. The longest class I had in 4 years was only 2 hours long. My geology prof actually made me go home one day when I was sick. Seriously, college was amazing. If I could get a job that was just college every day, I'd take it in a heartbeat. Story 83. Me going into secondary school. I was going to be thrown out within a month because I was such an awful child. I rocked back in my chair, I got upset when the other kids bullied me, I fidgeted, I was too loud, etc. Just unmedicated ADHD. They tried to get my mom to send me to the bad school instead of the good one I got into. Tried to get my mom to send me to the special school for very bad kids. I went to the good school. Guess who suddenly had no bad behavioral problems? I think maybe 1 or 2 teachers got on my case about fidgeting, but that was about it. No one cared as long as I was focusing. It helped me focus. Teachers wouldn't just ignore me. They'd call on me to answer questions, making me a lot less frustrated. Kids weren't as bad to me, and I was so weird in year 7. Luckily, year 8 I became self-aware, but things went to crap year 9 completely, and year 8 wasn't great. I went from being the worst kid in the school, to being in trouble constantly, to just a regular kid. No issues at all. Somehow I was magically cured. I'd get sent out for the slightest thing. One time I got in trouble for yelling at a kid who was picking up my glasses with scissors. I had to go home and tell my mom that I had let a kid scratch up the lenses because I got sent out for yelling at him while he was doing it. The kid, he was left to continue playing with my glasses with scissors. I got told if I didn't want them broken, I should have put them in my tray. They were in my tray. He was in my seat. Went in it and pulled them out. Story 84. Believed to be false, but eating unhealthy foods, cholesterol and all that, is apparently not always bad depending on your microbiome. My dad was reading a book that he let me in on, don't know the name, and it shows that scientists reckon that different microbiomes handle food differently and works like genes. Their source? The French, who didn't really eat particularly healthy all the time. Sure, you can eat bread and cheese, but they're a lot, no? Apparently, they knew that they could train their microbiome. Of course, they didn't know about the microbiome and all the science behind it, but they knew that you could train your system by consuming particularly gross stuff, mostly things that contain a lot of bacteria. They even made some cheese by curdling it until it grows a skin, then drenching it in horse piss. I'll just leave it here that I don't know if all this is all true, but it definitely interested me. My earth science teacher in 6th grade tried to do some bullcrap about sweat actually being pee because both things have salt, ammonia, and water, and because both are produced in the body from the water we drink. The truth is, while they do both happen to have the salt, water, ammonia combo, the proportions are fairly different, and piss has more stuff like waste and minerals. And while both do come from the water we consume, piss comes from the digestive tract, and sweat comes from the water absorbed in your pores, which are given then to your sweat glands and prepared for when it is needed. So if you're reading this, Mr. Conti, you were my favorite teacher, but your understanding of the human body is effing dumb. Story 86. A lot of stuff, actually, now that I think about it. In school, I was taught how to fit in society. I was very rarely actually taught to understand, but just taught to memorize. I was never taught to actually do my own research and form an opinion based on objective facts, but I was taught to just basically believe everything I'm told. I believe this is one of the reasons why we're evolving less and less as a species. We don't learn to actually think and innovate. We are taught to get a steady job just to make money to survive. We're not actually taught how we can better the human race. For example, humans used to be able to build pyramids with almost their bare hands. We've forgotten how to do that. It's almost like we're going in the opposite direction as a species. If we were taught to actually understand what Einstein meant with relativity, instead of just memorizing E equals mc squared. No questions, that's just how it is. I remember asking my teacher about something regarding the rules of motion, and instead of actually explaining what it means, so I would be able to understand it, his answer was just, because that's just how it is. My science teacher is also Catholic, which might have been why he wasn't too eager teaching science. I could be completely wrong. I'm no expert in human behavior or anything, but it's just something I've noticed and thought a great deal about. Story 87. We had a PT teacher who was also the cricket coach. There was a rule at our school that you had to play at least one winter and summer sport. Anyway, there was a lot of my fellow classmates who didn't play any sports at the school, and this PT teacher gave us a big speech and said that if we didn't play any sports, it'll look bad on our, quote, permanent record, and that we wouldn't have a very good chance of getting into a university after school if we didn't play sport. He followed this by saying that the universities look into this aspect of our school careers. I finished school, went to university, and they had no issue with me. Story 89. When I was in school, there was the group called Most Teens Don't. Me and my friends joined in like 7th grade. The group was just kids in our grade letting everyone know the dangers of vaping, smoking, and drinking, and that most teens in the United States didn't do any of that stuff. 2 years later, we were all drinking at parties and smoking and vaping, and almost everyone in our grade did it, and they got all their info from a test that you took and stated if you had done these things or not, but who would admit to doing these on a test when you're a minor? We still do it now that we're graduated. Story 90. I was raised in South Carolina. The school system was effing terrible. I was taught dumb crap like blood is blue until it hits oxygen, but also really awful stuff like slaves were happy to be brought to America because Africa is a terrible place to live and their masters have them free food. Also, the typical states' rights caused the Civil War garbage. I kept in contact with my 1st grade teacher and nannied her kids one summer. She goes out and drinks margaritas and talks crap about her former students with all the other elementary school teachers, and the more I interact with them as adults, the more obvious it is that they're also victims of a terrible education system. But damn, get out of your ass, ma'am. Story 91. I'm Russian and I've been studying in Russian school for 9 years. Now I'm 15 years old and it's too difficult to realize that absolutely the majority of school program is useless and doesn't give any knowledge. Our system of education is generally awful, and I literally understood that if I played Fortnite or smoked wet, instead of going to school, my mental and physical health would have been than now. Few words about Russian education. We can't choose or change anything in the personal system. There are some subjects like math, Russian, or PE, which we have to visit and can't choose definite direction, like physical math or humanitarian. It's bad because sitting on biology or chemistry doesn't give any knowledges because teachers can't explain information well, and books are so stupid and complicated for reading. You may think that I'm just a fool who doesn't want to study. That's right, only in second case. I hate studying in such system. Math, informatics, and English lessons are very close to me, but instead of learning them, majority of school time, I have to go to other lessons which are not close to me. Story 93. Not learned but told. In my very first year, I was told by my teacher that I was the bottom of the barrel, that I'll never succeed, that I'm worthless, and my parents would die from smoking. She told that to a effing elementary student in their very first year of school. But here I am. I haven't failed a single grade. I'm in a technical school. I got to work in one of the biggest battery manufacturing companies as a mechanic for their fleet, making bank, and I've got my first car and my driver's license, finishing up my final year of high school. Suck a dick, Mrs. Smith. Story 94. That racism ended with desegregation. It's not that I was told no one is racist anymore, but in my child mind, racism was a big bad that could be defeated like Hitler. Once slavery and segregation was a thing of the past, so was racism. And since I was from a predominantly white area, I never actually saw anything that would lead me to believe otherwise. If racists were around, there were few chances for them to display it in a way a child would notice. So learning about it was the same as learning about any ancient civilization. I thought humanity was cool for having achieved that, and I was really proud of us. Story 95. Not primary, but rather secondary school. When learning about ancient Southeast Asian civilizations in Form 1 history, the book mentions the Angkor people designed the Angkor Wat as the center of the universe, and called it their Ord Cosmos. Unless the Angkor actually did learn Greek and built a Warcraft-themed amusement park instead of a temple complex, there's no way they called the representation of Mount Meru Horde World. Story 96. Okay, so I figured this out as a lie as a kid, but it's worth sharing. My teacher took a year off work the year before me because she was kicked by a horse in the head and needed a lot of medical care. The year I had her, 5th grade, she taught my mostly black class that the Reconstruction period of American history is when the now freed slave population took over and reconstructed the country using white slave labor. This, according to her, continued until MLK made a speech 100 years later ending the slavery of white people. She retired that year. I think of her often. Story 97. So many things, especially in science, and it ties into how science education works in North America. Science tends to be taught as a set of factual beliefs in elementary schools. They don't focus on the process of how results were obtained, but rather what the results are. This is how you get some weird, almost right science being taught because those teaching are either dumbing it down or not comfortable with the science itself. Take a pretty common example like, the sun is the center of the solar system. The sun is not the center of the solar system, as there's no privileged reference point in the universe, relativity. A more correct statement would be, the gravitational centroid of the solar system resides somewhere within or nearby the sun. Sure, elementary school kids aren't going to understand that whole sentence in one gulp, but that doesn't mean that the first statement is correct. We need to ask the right questions of them, which would help them understand better, like, why would someone think the sun was the center of the solar system? What's the largest object in the solar system? What objects spin around others in space? How might we make a test to check these things? Those are the kinds of things I wish I was taught to think about because it's the process of observation that makes science what it is, not the factual outputs. Using the aforementioned type of dumbing down statements can be fine unless you rely on them, which is what seems to now be the case. But take a bunch of kids and cram their coconuts full of science facts, and why wouldn't they see the science teacher as just another person spouting information at them like their pastor at church? Story 98. The sex ed teacher told us the anus wasn't designed for sex. It's shaped like a corkscrew, so there's only one correct way, and its purpose is getting stuff out, not accepting stuff in. Having butt intercourse would tear this, cause infection, and kill you. All she had to say was, use lots of lube and get warmed up first so you don't get hurt. But it's possible this professor was genuinely ignorant or just homophobic. Graduated in '08 in Maryland. They were very much not teaching how to have safe sex. They were teaching us to avoid sex altogether. There was zero sex education for gay/trans/queer folks in school, so honestly, I didn't learn anything other than the host I could be for STIs. No positivity with sex, no info on how to give/receive pleasure, no info about sexual hygiene, not discussing options of PIV sex with openness or positivity. Teaching young people to avoid sex as if it's bad and not properly educating them on all types of sex and how to be safe and attentive is a mistake for society. We should be drilling into young people not just about condoms, STIs, and pregnancy. We should be telling them more info, like if you have multiple partners, you should get tested every 3 to 6 months. If you and your partners choose not to get tested before intercourse, or let's learn properly about which lubes you should use for which parts of your body. Because believe it or not, the lube you use where and with what matters for maintaining sexual health. Heck, everyone knows about Plan B from high school, but how many know that Plan B won't prevent pregnancy if you/your partner are already ovulating? They never taught keeping track of cycles and fertility windows to teach folks to be more aware of their fertility, so mistakes aren't made as frequently because the answer to everything is don't have sex, but if you do, wear a condom, because you'll either get sick or pregnant or both. Consent wasn't touched up enough in sex education either. Folks still think it's perfectly okay to have sex with someone who's had a lot to drink. I've told partners I've been drinking or am very drunk, and I've blacked out a few times where I had sex and don't remember it happening and felt uncomfortable that I had no idea what happened to me. No one has told me, oh, we didn't F because you were too drunk to properly consent. They typically say, oh, we F'd. I didn't know you were that drunk. Sex ed didn't prepare me, at least, for a world full of sexual and reproductive coercion where folks lie to and pressure folks into having sex they wouldn't otherwise agree to having, and how to be a better ally to yourself in situations like that. I'm a queer trans guy. I've had to re-educate myself on my body's somewhat unique situation. I've had to re-educate myself on other bodies. I've had to teach myself personalized sex education at 30 years old because there simply was not enough to prepare me for the kinds of sex and scenarios I'd explore with partners of all different kinds of body types and situations. Story 99. We had a snarky teacher trying to teach us about giving directions. The activity was to get into groups and write down instructions, step by step, as to how someone would make a PB&J sandwich. She pressed us for time, and then the twist was that she would make the PB&J based on our directions, trying to make it as absurd as possible. She made it super clear that we had to specify with hands for various instructions, and that certain language was super important. I found out later that no one ever has to include use your hands to in any instructions. Even more, after thinking about it, it doesn't matter what you use if you can manage to do what you're supposed to. Then you still get a PB&J sandwich with or without your hands. Story 100. That Florence Nightingale was on the front lines of the Great War. Female Dog wasn't even within 30 miles of the front line and did not treat frontline soldiers. We were told she was like an ER trauma nurse when really she was an ICU nurse. But she did save lives with statistics. There's something like 16,000 or 19,000 deaths were not from war-related injuries, but from common treatable ailments that were spread by poor sanitation. Story 101. In a social psychology course in college, I was taught that, among other things, you could prime people to walk more slowly by saying elderly-themed words to them. In the very next semester, I took a research capstone course where our textbook was called The 7 Deadly Sins of Psychology, and in that book, they debunked that exact study about priming. Not sure when the book was published in comparison to when I took the social psych class, but it's likely that the social psych professor, who I hated for other reasons, was teaching us already disproven studies as if they were fact. I'm still flabbergasted by it to this day. Story 102. College professors were very nice in many ways, but if it was an exam day and I didn't have a pencil, I think they would have called me a effing idiot and asked the class if they had a pencil to spare for a effing idiot. Any other days, I would just not take notes if I didn't have a pencil. On an exam day, that's the only thing you need, so it's a bit ridiculous to forget. It's like you didn't prepare at all. Story 103. The American Dream. It's something you grow up believing in so heavily when you're the child of immigrant parents who risk their lives crossing the border. School reinforced that for me. We sang the Pledge of Allegiance, fell for the propaganda following 9/11, were taught only very briefly what the Civil War and Vietnam War were. My parents still think the American dream is as real as the Iraq War was necessary. Today, as I get older and see the world more for what it is, it feels like every day the U.S. strays further and further from the message imprinted on the Statue of Liberty. And if the American dream was never true, what else was I taught early on that isn't true as well? Sometimes I wonder if there is something more going on besides just the colonists having a problem with taxation. If the corruption we see in our government today, the corporate control, are all just product of centuries worth of work to create this countrywide safe haven for greed. I find it harder every day to believe the U.S. isn't on some kind of collision course with reality as I learn more about this country's history. And not just history with major events, but minor events that happened in cities and states. The long history in this country of corporate greed overriding worker interests, and I mean like straight up sabotage and beatings and hit squads and open racism, the long history of this country treating human beings like spectacles at a county fair, the long history of singling out ethnic groups to blame for any shortcomings or to distract from the corporate hands dipping into the citizens' pockets. Honestly, I sometimes think that if given the chance to be free of consequence, a lot of our politicians and CEOs would happily and readily jump at the opportunity to be openly racist and discriminate, to ask who we're sleeping with, how we're eating, what we're watching, how we're spending our free time. If given the chance, they would happily bring back child workers, take away the health care, replace the 40-hour work weeks with 80 hours, get rid of breaks and PTO, and reduce the pay. There's so much pain and frustration among the general populace, yes, but I also see so much unfettered greed among the elites just building up. The little taxes they do pay, and yet they still feel like they should be paying far less. What do you do with that? What do you do with the Epsteins of the world? The Weinsteins, the Griffiths, the Kochs, the Murdochs? They pay so little back to society and keep so much for themselves, and yet it still bothers them that they're paying. No, I don't believe in the American dream anymore. It just sounds like a marketing campaign for a really crappy product that will break in like 2 days. Story 104. What I was taught. Cold War teachers taught me Hitler and the Nazis were taking over Europe and got all the way to France until America finally stepped in to save the world from Hitler and finally defeat the Nazis. It wasn't until much later I learned it was actually the Soviet Union that defeated Hitler enough to where Europe could fight back. What I was taught. The American colonies fought and defeated the mighty British Army by using our excellent guerrilla tactics and strategy. Oh, and by the way, the French helped. Truth is, the American Revolution was practically won for us by the French. We would have completely lost it if the French didn't save us. Plus, we never did fight the full British Army because they were fighting the French all over. France saved our ass. What I was taught. The United States were always the good guys and only fought battles for good and truth and justice and democracy and all that. Truth? We fought and killed so many Indian tribes and taking their land that I now question, has America ever been the good guys? Story 105. That our brains are what make us breathe. Specifically, that our brainstem senses levels of carbon dioxide to drive breathing. This has since been proven false. It's actually stereocilia, cells in your inner ear which also detect sound, that do this. Mice with genomycin-damaged ears lost 98% of their breathing drive. This is why babies that are born deaf die very shortly from sudden infant death syndrome. They just stop breathing in their sleep because their damaged ears do not tell their brain to make their lungs breathe. The inner ear is a critical part of the respiratory system. Always protect your hearing. It may just save your life. Story 106. As a chiropractor teacher, nearly everything. My research has taught us that we know so little about the true nature of back pain and how to best manage it. What we do know to be false is that bones do not go out of alignment without severe trauma, and no manual therapies are able to realign your spine. Everybody has some asymmetries, and this is completely okay. Just because something makes your pain go away temporarily does not mean it is healing and or necessary for recovery from pain. Most pain self-resolves in due time. The goal is to avoid the things that are likely to make the pain become chronic. Story 107. About 95% of drug education. I can't think of a single drug they told us eats holes in your brain that actually eats holes in your brain. Every teacher would swap in a new one, be it ecstasy, speed, etc., and all show the same fMRI image that doesn't actually represent holes in your brain. Sure, some drugs like Duster actually do eat holes in your brain, but they somehow never managed to bring that one up. Psychedelics do not make you hallucinate blood coming out of the walls and Satan chasing you with a chainsaw. Most of the time, the effects are incredibly pleasant, with virtually no side effects. And bad trips are a lot more comparable to a miserable fever dream, i.e. angry shapes and colors and just feeling bad. Deliriants can make you see that sort of stuff, but again, they never brought those up. Nobody is giving out drugs for free, and they're especially not secretly slipping people heroin in hopes they get addicted. That'd be atrocious business practice and just proves if you scare someone, they're less likely to actually think if something makes sense. Never taught us the connection between between illegal drugs and everyday medications. My high school health teacher got really uncomfortable when some kids started asking about why it's okay to be prescribed to amphetamines, or why it's okay that they use fentanyl in hospitals if, according to her, the only reason for these molecules to exist is for the sake of being evil and nothing else. Not saying drugs aren't dangerous, but holy crap, drug education is not. It'd be such a wonderful opportunity to dip into light neurochemistry and get kids interested in how the brain works while also showing the dangers of drugs, but instead they choose for it to be useless. Story 108, that racism ended in the 60s with equal rights. I grew up mostly in the 80s with my own kids by the 90s, and I know things like the KKK still existed. I'm not blind, but being a white guy, I never noticed how bad racism still was until ugliness surged during the Obama years, and outright white nationalism flourished during Trump years, and still today. I never knew hate was still a big thing. I've had blinders on, I guess. It's a commodity, and some make money on it. I thought it would die when my parents' racist generation passed on, but there's plenty of young, uneducated, and easily influenced folks out there. Sad and more amazingly, it's everywhere. Not just the US, although I'd like to think it's just a US issue. It's really sad when they talk about a GOP candidate won't do well in this certain district because the people tend to be more educated. Holy crap. Holy effing crap. I really had blinders on most of my young adult life as I felt things were more progressive and better every year. Racism and made-up fears can actually sway an election still. Boy, my school was wrong. Story 109. Competence and hard work will be recognized by regular evaluations and rewarded appropriately by authority figures. Friends are nice, but it's only performance and maybe obedience that truly matters. Even to this day, I have to shake myself out of that mindset and remind myself that my work or other areas in my life aren't under any obligation to be fair or to reward me any more than the minimum they can get away with. And networking and social engineering are much more important to success in the long term than any credential or metric. And even when I know that, logically, I still feel guilty and lazy for thinking that way. That old Protestant work ethic combined with the meritocracy of the educational system really did a number on my overachieving brain. I still feel to some degree as though this is how the world should work. Meritocracy seems right and good to me as an ideal at a basic visceral level. Again, probably from that upbringing. But like most other utopian ideals, it has absolutely nothing to do with the actual reality of succeeding in human society. Story 110. My high school had a phase of using a blue square bumper sticker with two yellow lines parallel to each other, calling it the pause campaign. As in, don't text and drive, hit pause. After I moved away, my SO and I were out one day when I saw the familiar pause campaign sticker, but sideways? I exclaimed, "Oh wow, you had the pause campaign out here too?" No, that's the human rights campaign. My rural Southern Light school had repurposed a well-known LGBTQ advocacy group's logo for their Week Drive Safe program. On a similar note, that very school was threatened with a lawsuit for using their logo as their new mascot icon sometime after I graduated. Story 111. That capitalism is the best system in Earth and America is number one, and that hard work equates to money. That doing all the right things will still land you in a situation like mine, a corporate worker with decent pay, living in a living room with shelves made of cardboard, and a near insurmountable amount of debt. Another lie. That you'll be able to afford to have even one child, or ever afford to have a home, or even a small one, or that things get better as time goes on. My wages have increased marginally, while cost of living has skyrocketed because the cost of living in the US is somebody else's profit. And that is not quite so ready to just leave. I'm now looking into visas to get the F out. This is a godforsaken country on its way out. I grew up with Bush as president. Even as a kid, I knew I saw that moron in office and I knew it was going to go downhill. Story 112. My great parents taught me mathematics before I got to kindergarten. I used to love trolling my elementary school teachers. Kindergarten teacher, you can't subtract a bigger number from a smaller number. Me, actually you can. It's called a negative number. Fourth grade teacher, you can't take the square root of a negative number. Me, actually you can. It's called an imaginary number. Around third grade, I became interested in quantum physics. The very basics. I'm no Einstein. That's when things really got fun. Fourth grade quiz. What is 30 minutes after 5:45? My answer? From whose perspective? Yours or the clock's? While the Newtonian solution is correct from the clock's relative perspective, it will be 6:15. The theory of relativity suggests that the observer performing this measurement will read a slightly lower value due to space-time contraction, unless they maintain a perfect zero velocity relative to their location upon first measurement, which is physically impossible. Therefore, an uninformed measurer cannot truly know the exact time of the clock after they've experienced 30 minutes, and must merely deduce an estimate based on Newtonian assumptions. TLDR, some of my elementary teachers hated my guts. Listen, I don't have any doubt that you've studied up on Newtonian theory and are able to answer that question like that now. I just have a hard time envisioning a fourth grader writing out that answer to a question on a quiz. So yeah, I'm going to call BS on that one. But good story. Good story. Story 113. When I was in grade 6, they said, get used to listening and making your own notes because teachers in junior high don't put notes on the board. They just stand at the front of the classroom and talk. When I got to high school, they still put notes on the board and PowerPoint and posted them on the internet. Story 114. Well, there have been dinosaurs that have been removed and returned to the world of what dinosaurs existed. Also, dinosaurs are birds now. One that always stuck in my craw is from grade school. We were asked something like, give examples of multiple types of systems, and I said, solar systems. I was told that no, we only know about our own solar system, so we don't know if there are multiple ones. I remember thinking, that can't be right. Billions of stars and none of them have multiple planets orbiting them? Seem nuts, especially since I watched Star Trek. Oh, and I was of course told that I would need cursive writing, in pen, because nobody printed after grade school. Other than my signature, not really a necessity. Story 115. I went to Christian school, so where to even begin? People believe in evolution. Lots of smart people do, actually. Sex must be safe for marriage, for your marriage to work. The Band-Aid example, OMG. Condoms being only 99% effective as a high-risk situation. So my friends were like, oh, why use them? The only meaningful existence is complete service to God. Lots of people do meaningful things, not in service to God. Who knew? Men only really find virgins attractive. Checked with my boyfriend on this one. The only reason to be a good person is God. Not wanting to hurt people? Who cares? So many things when I came out and went to public college. I was like, wait, what? It was a lot. The evolution thing really got me through, when we were learning the science behind it. I was like, huh? There's science that supports this? I really didn't have a clue. Story 116. Took a world religions class in college and was taught about 2 stages of Buddha's life. We all know about the plump, happy Buddha, but less known was a younger Buddha, a skinny one. The story went, young Buddha was influenced by Western religions, and to reach spiritual purity, you had to live as austere and minimalist as you can, like Western monks. As Buddha contemplated life and existence, he realized there was all this beauty and pleasure to be had in this world, and began to indulge in life's gifts. This was the familiar plump Buddha. This resonates with me, and I've used the story of the skinny/plump Buddha many times over 30 years. Had an unwanted divorce and looked for guidance on how to find those pleasures in life again. I looked into some Buddhist teachings, words of wisdom, and was completely floored. None of that is accurate. Took the class with a friend and asked him if he remembers the Buddha story, and he too remembers the young/old, skinny/plump section about Buddhism. Story 117. Literally everything I learned about the Civil War has been proven to be false. For example, in school I learned that the Missouri Compromise of 1820, in which Missouri was admitted as a slave state and Maine as a free state at the same time, was intended to not upset the balance of power in Congress. However, I've since learned that the MO Compromise was only to perpetuate the immoral institution of slavery and no other purpose. In school, I learned that the South chose that particular time and no earlier time to secede because the balance of power in Congress shifted against the South. However, I've since learned that the only reason and no other reason for that timing was to perpetuate the immoral institution of slavery. I also learned in school that the Confederates entered Gettysburg because they needed supplies. However, I've since learned that the only reason and no other reason for marching to Gettysburg was to perpetuate the immoral institution of slavery. In school, they taught that Pickett's charge was part of Lee's plan to take Cemetery Hill and the surrounding roads, but I later found out that Pickett charged to perpetuate the immoral institution of slavery. I wish I had known this in school because the answers to the test would have been so much easier. Story 118. Russian history. I moved to the US with my mother when I was 14 years old. Decades later, I'm still discovering and learning about Russian history that wasn't taught to us in school when I lived in Russia. For example, World War II. In Russia at the time, we were taught that the US would only help a country that was losing in World War II. Since Russia was losing the war at some point, that's when the US intervened and helped Russia to fight against Germany. 15 years ago, I bought a book. It spoke about Russian soldiers essaying women and children in East European countries during World War II. I almost puked after I finished reading it, and I was in a bad place for 2 weeks. I was disgusted with myself and my former country. Yet again, Russian soldiers are doing it again during a war against Ukraine. Story 119. That everything I learn will be beneficial to the adult world. I know the functions of a leaf by heart, the names and functions of a cell by heart, know the Pledge of Allegiance by heart, and know how much money it would cost to buy 23 carts filled with an average of 20 to 30 Mountain Dew liter bottle, and how many carloads it would take with a 36-gallon tank running at 15 to 35 mph in the summer with the chance of meatballs. Damned if I know what to do with anything else. Though I recently played Genshin Impact and Bad Apple on my calculator, so that was fun.